What would you do if you discovered a diary whose pages were soaked in blood? And between the lines hid a story so terrifying that local authorities preferred to bury it for decades? In the dusty archives of Cadmus County, Texas, among hundreds of forgotten documents from the late 19th century, researchers stumbled upon a folder with a red seal marked classified. Inside was information about an establishment known as the Caulfield Sisters Inn, which at first glance seemed like an ordinary saloon with extra services, so common in the Wild West. But what happened behind the heavy oak doors of this establishment went far beyond the usual immorality of the frontier. If you value historical truth, even when it's steeped in horror, stay with us. This story will change your perception of what people are capable of in the pursuit of power and wealth. It was the summer of 1875 when young Deputy Sheriff Joseph Martinez first crossed the threshold of the Caulfield Sisters establishment. According to entries in his personal diary, found many years after his death, he arrived in the town of Crosswind at the direction of the sheriff of a neighboring county to investigate a series of disappearances. The air in this town was heavy, Martinez wrote, not only from the heat and dust, but also from something unspoken that hung between the residents like an invisible web of fear. Crosswind was located in a remote part of West Texas, among hills and dried-up riverbeds. The town prospered thanks to silver mines, which attracted workers from all over the continent. And there, on Main Street, stood a two-story red brick building, the only one of its kind in the entire settlement. Martinez described it as an island of civilization in the middle of a desert sea, with curtains made of real French silk and a piano whose sounds echoed throughout the street every evening. Sisters Elizabeth and Mary Caulfield arrived in Crosswind in 1872, as confirmed by land purchase records in the municipal archive. The two women, dressed in mourning, said that they had come from New Orleans after the death of the older sister's husband. They brought with them a significant sum of money, which allowed them to build the most impressive building in the city. Within a few months, the Caulfield Sisters Inn became the center of Crosswind's social life. Martinez noted a strangeness that immediately caught his eye. For an establishment of this type, it was unusually quiet. I expected to hear drunken shouts, the sound of breaking glass, and gunshots. Instead, only muffled conversations and melodious female laughter came from behind the doors. This was the first of many inconsistencies that would later form a sinister picture. The deputy sheriff decided to begin his investigation by visiting the establishment as an ordinary customer. According to his records, everything inside the inn looked even more unusual than outside. The walls were upholstered in dark red velvet, the lighting was dim, and behind the long bar stood Elizabeth Caulfield, a woman of about 40 with perfect posture and a cold gaze from her gray eyes. She smiled at every visitor, Martinez wrote. But that smile never reached her eyes, which remained as still as those of a porcelain doll. Several young women worked in the hall, serving drinks and chatting with customers. Martinez noted that they were all unusually beautiful and well-dressed, which was rare in such establishments on the frontier. But something in their movements seemed mechanical, as if they were not moving of their own free will. This diary entry appeared after Martinez's third visit to the inn. The local undertaker, whom Martinez met the next day, shared information that made the young deputy sheriff wary. According to Ezra Wilkins, at least 3 people had disappeared from the town in the past 2 years. All were men, mostly minors without families. Nobody asks too many questions, Wilkins said. According to an entry in Martinez's diary, on the frontier, people come and go, but it's strange that they were all regular customers of the Caulfield sisters. And they all disappeared after they were seen going up to the second floor with one of the girls. Records from the town hospital, which Martinez studied, added another disturbing element to the puzzle. Dr. Cyrus Bell, the only doctor in Crosswind, recorded an unusual number of cases of severe anemia among the population. Patients complain of weakness, dizziness, and paleness, the doctor wrote in his medical journal. Many cannot remember what happened to them for hours or even days. The common factor for everyone is that the last thing they remember is a visit to the Caulfield Sisters Inn. This prompted Martinez to deepen his investigation. He began observing the inn every night, recording who entered and who left. According to his observations, about 3 visitors went up to the second floor every evening, and not all of them returned by morning. Those who came back down looked exhausted and moved with difficulty, as if they had lost all their strength. One night, Martinez noticed a heavy sack being carried out of the back door of the inn and loaded onto a cart, which then headed towards the abandoned silver mines. He followed the cart and witnessed 2 men throwing the sack into one of the abandoned mine shafts. The sound of the fall was heavy and dull, Martinez noted, as if there was something weighty inside, possibly a human body. But what they found in those mines where they dumped these bags would have remained unknown if it weren't for the report of geologist William Stone, dated 1876. Stone was sent to Crosswind by a mining company to assess the possibility of resuming work in the abandoned mines. What he discovered forced him to immediately leave the city and send a detailed report not only to his employers, but also to the federal authorities. At a depth of about 100 feet in a side tunnel of the old Silver Hope mine, I discovered the remains of several human bodies in various stages of decomposition, Stone wrote. But that's not what shocked me the most. All the bodies were strangely drained of blood, with small but deep cuts on the neck and wrists. Near the bodies, I found strange symbols drawn with something resembling dried blood, and several silver bowls with traces of congealed blood at the bottom. This report could have been key evidence in the investigation, but it never reached local authorities. According to Postal Service records, William Stone sent several letters from a neighboring town, but none of them were delivered to the addressee. The geologist himself disappeared on his way to San Antonio, and his body was never found. Meanwhile, Martinez continued his investigation, gradually getting closer to uncovering the secret of the Caulfield sisters' inn. He noticed that the younger sister, Mary, rarely appeared in the main hall of the establishment. Locals said that she took care of special clients on the second floor. According to Martinez's records, one night he managed to get to the second floor through a window in the back of the building. What he saw there forever changed his perception of the limits of human cruelty. The rooms on the second floor are not like ordinary brothel rooms, he wrote with a trembling hand. They are more like operating rooms or places for rituals, covered in strange symbols on the walls, shelves with books in languages I don't know, and jars with contents that I cannot and do not want to describe. In the farthest room, Martinez discovered something that made him numb with horror. There, on a high table, lay a man, one of the miners whom Martinez had seen entering the establishment a few hours earlier. The man was unconscious. His arms and legs were tied to the corners of the table, and blood slowly trickled from a small cut on his neck, collecting in a silver bowl held by Mary Caulfield. She didn't seem concerned about my appearance, Martinez noted. On the contrary, she smiled and invited me to join, as if I had interrupted not an act of monstrous violence, but an ordinary dinner. We are always happy to welcome new brothers and sisters, she said. Her voice sounded melodious and soothing, despite the horror of what was happening. Despite the horror of the situation, Martinez tried to free the man, but felt a heavy blow to the back of his head. He woke up tied to the same table in the next room. Elizabeth Caulfield stood over him. Her face was calm and focused. "We knew you were coming," she said. "We always know when someone starts asking too many questions." In his diary, which miraculously survived because Martinez managed to hide it in his boot, the deputy sheriff described what Elizabeth had told him that night. The story of the Caulfield sisters was much older and more terrible than could be imagined. They were not sisters, and they were not even Caulfields. Their real names remained in the past, lost in the centuries of history. According to Elizabeth, they came from the old world many generations ago, fleeing persecution in America. They found the perfect place to continue their practices. The wild, uncontrolled frontier, where people disappear every day and no one asks questions. They spoke of blood as the elixir of life, Martinez wrote, of how human blood, especially the blood of strong men, contains their life force which can be extracted and used. They called themselves guardians of ancient knowledge and claimed to practice rituals that existed long before Christianity. According to their story, the sisters moved from town to town, usually staying in one place for no more than 2 to 3 years before suspicion became too strong. They always chose remote mining towns, where the flow of lonely men was constant and disappearances were commonplace. What happened to the men who went up to the second floor of the inn went beyond the usual concept of evil. The sisters didn't just kill them, they slowly drained them of blood, keeping the victims in a semi-conscious state with the help of some herbs and chemicals. The process could take weeks before the victim died from blood loss. But the most terrible thing was that the Caulfield sisters were not alone in their practices. Elizabeth spoke of a family scattered throughout America. Martinez wrote of people who share their beliefs and methods. She mentioned similar establishments in Colorado, Montana, and even California, all operating according to the same scheme. Blood was used in rituals whose purpose was to prolong life and gain certain abilities. Elizabeth boasted that she was not 40 years old, as the locals believed, but much older. "We were here before your ancestors crossed the ocean," she told Martinez, "and we will be here when the last of your descendants disappears from the face of the earth." The girls who worked in the establishment were not just prostitutes. They were assistants in the rituals and often became participants in the bloody ceremonies themselves. Some of them were apprentices, whom the sisters were preparing to continue their work in other cities. What happened to Joseph Martinez after that night remained unknown for a long time. His diary ends with a description of his conversation with Elizabeth. The last words written by his hand are, "They are going to start the ritual. Elizabeth says that my blood is especially valuable because of my determination and willpower. I hear them preparing the tools in the next room. These are my last words. If anyone finds this diary, stop them." However, the story does not end there. 3 months after Martinez's disappearance, a detachment of rangers under the command of Captain Thomas Ryder arrived in Crosswind. They came in search of the missing deputy sheriff, but found much more than they expected. According to the official report of the Rangers, preserved in the archives of the state of Texas, when they arrived in the city, the Caulfield Sisters Inn was engulfed in flames. The fire started late at night and quickly spread throughout the building. Witnesses spoke of strange screams coming from inside, unlike ordinary cries of pain or fear. When the fire was extinguished, the Rangers found numerous human remains under the rubble. Most of the bodies were too charred for identification, but some retained traces of strange ritual cuts. In the basement of the building, the Rangers found a real laboratory with unusual tools, books in unknown languages, and dozens of glass vessels filled with blood. The most disturbing discovery was that among the dead, no bodies could be identified that could belong to the Caulfield sisters. Despite the fact that all the exits from the building were engulfed in flames and escape seemed impossible, the sisters' bodies were never found. Captain Ryder conducted a thorough investigation, questioning all the residents of Crosswind. It turned out that a week before the fire, a group of 6 people, 3 men and 3 women, had arrived in the city and stayed at the inn. According to witnesses, they were pale, well-dressed, and kept to themselves. After the fire, none of them were found either. Among the debris, the Rangers discovered a safe that had somehow survived the fire. Inside were documents confirming the existence of a network of similar establishments across the country. Letters, accounts, even maps with marked locations indicated that the Caulfield Sisters Inn was just one link in the chain. Of particular interest was a notebook, presumably belonging to Elizabeth Caulfield. It contained records of the collection, as she called the process of extracting blood, with the names of the victims and the amount of blood obtained. In the 3 years of operation in Crosswind, the sisters had collected blood from more than 60 people, most of whom probably died. The notebook also contained strange formulas and calculations related to the phases of the moon and the position of the stars. Some pages were devoted to describing a great ritual that was to take place on the night of the full moon in October of 1875, just a few days after the fire. Captain Ryder, being a practical man and skeptical of superstitions, was nevertheless deeply shocked by the evidence found. In his personal diary, which became available to researchers only 100 years after his death, he wrote, "I have seen much evil in my time, but what was happening in Crosswind goes beyond human understanding. The Caulfield sisters were not ordinary criminals or madmen. There was a system, a purpose, and knowledge in their actions that should not exist in the civilized world. The Rangers continued the investigation, checking all the locations mentioned in the documents. Over the next year, raids were conducted on similar establishments in Colorado and Montana. According to reports, evidence of the same ritual practices as in the Caulfield Sisters Inn was found in each of them. However, in none of them was it possible to detain people resembling the Caulfield sisters or their accomplices. It seemed they were always one step ahead of the law. An interesting addition to the story was the testimony of one of the girls who worked at the inn and managed to survive the fire. Mary Ellen Davis, a 17-year-old orphan from San Antonio, was found by the Rangers a mile from the city, wandering along the road in a state of shock. After several weeks of treatment, she was able to tell about what was happening in the establishment. According to her testimony, the Caulfield sisters recruited girls from orphanages and poor families, promising them good work and protection. At first, they were only required to serve customers in the bar and sometimes provide standard intimate services. But over time, select girls were initiated into the higher mysteries, as Elizabeth called it. They taught us to believe that blood is a sacred liquid containing life itself, Mary Ellen said. They said that if you collect and use blood correctly, you can gain incredible powers and live for hundreds of years. Some of the girls fully believed in this and enthusiastically participated in the rituals. Others, like me, did it out of fear. Mary Ellen described strange ceremonies held on the full moon, when all the girls and the Caulfield sisters gathered in the central room on the second floor. They drank a mixture of blood and some kind of alcohol from silver bowls, after which many fell into a trance or spoke in incomprehensible languages. Especially disturbing was her description of the last days before the fire. According to Mary Ellen, a week before that, 6 strangers arrived at the inn, whom the Caulfield sisters greeted with extraordinary reverence. They called them elders and said that they had come for the great collection, the girl recalled. Everyone was excited and scared at the same time. The sisters became even more cruel and demanding, forcing us to work day and night, preparing everything for some important event. On the night of the fire, according to Mary Ellen, she heard a strange noise from the central room and, peeking through the keyhole, saw something that made her run from the inn without looking back. There they all were, the sisters, the strangers, and several girls, standing around a large silver pool filled with blood. In the middle of the pool lay the body of a man. I recognized him as the deputy sheriff who had come several months ago. He was pale but still alive, and they were slowly carving some symbols on his skin, collecting the blood in the pool. And then the blood began to move on its own, forming some figures in the air, and I heard a voice that could not belong to any person in the room. Mary Ellen could not or did not want to describe what happened next. She only remembered running away from the building, and behind her, a fire started. Witnesses confirmed that the fire started suddenly and engulfed the entire building in a matter of minutes, as if the inn itself was soaked in something flammable. After completing the investigation, Captain Ryder did everything possible to prevent information about the activities of the Caulfield sisters from becoming public knowledge. All documents were classified, and witnesses were advised to forget what they had seen and heard. In his final report, Ryder wrote, "The spread of such stories can cause panic and undermine people's faith in law and order. It is better that this chapter of Texas history remains forgotten." But, as is often the case with secrets of this magnitude, it was not possible to completely hide it. Over the following decades, reports of similar cases periodically appeared in various parts of America, of brothels and saloons where strange disappearances occurred, of women resembling the description of the Caulfield sisters, and of rituals involving human blood. Especially disturbing was the case of 1912 in New Mexico, where a similar establishment called the Silver Moon was discovered. The owners were 2 women calling themselves the Smith sisters. Their description was strikingly similar to the description of the Caulfield sisters, although almost 30 years had passed. As in the case of the inn, the investigation ended in a fire that destroyed all the evidence, and the bodies of the alleged criminals were never found. In 1935, historian Robert Campbell, studying archival materials for his book on the criminal history of the Wild West, stumbled upon the classified documents on the Caulfield sisters case. Despite the official ban, he included a brief mention of this case in his work, calling it one of the most disturbing and inexplicable episodes in the history of the American frontier. Campbell's book aroused interest among several researchers, who began their own investigations. One of them, Professor of Anthropology James Whitmar, published an article in 1952 in which he linked the practices of the Caulfield sisters with ancient European cults that worshipped blood. According to Whitmar, these cults may have existed for millennia, adapting to changing times and social conditions. The idea that blood contains life force and can transmit certain qualities from one person to another is found in almost all cultures of the world, Whitmar wrote. But in some European traditions, this belief has been transformed into a systematic practice of obtaining and using human blood for ritual purposes. There is evidence of similar cults in medieval Hungary, Romania, and even in some isolated regions of France and Spain. Whitmar suggested that with the advent of Christianity, these cults were forced to go underground, creating secret societies and organizations. Some of their adherents may have moved to the New World with the first colonists, finding ideal conditions in the wild and undeveloped lands to continue their practices. Particularly interesting was Whitmar's hypothesis that the Caulfield sisters and those like them may have belonged to a single organization that had existed for centuries. If we assume that their claim to prolong life with the help of certain rituals had a real basis, then we cannot rule out that some of these people actually lived unusually long, moving from one place to another and changing identities to avoid suspicion, he noted in his article. Whitmar's publication caused a scandal in academic circles. He was accused of sensationalism and insufficient scientific rigor. The university where he worked refused to renew his contract, and the professor's career was effectively destroyed. However, his research did not go unnoticed by those interested in paranormal phenomena and secret societies. In 1967, a group of independent researchers, inspired by Whitmar's work, organized an expedition to Crosswind, or what was left of it by that time. The city was practically abandoned. The mines had long been exhausted, and only a few families continued to live in the once prosperous settlement. The ruins of the Caulfield Sisters Inn were still visible on Main Street. Blackened brick walls, partially destroyed by time and plundered by local residents for the construction of other buildings. The expedition spent several weeks exploring the ruins and questioning the remaining residents, most of whom were descendants of those who lived in Crosswind during the time of the Caulfield sisters. Their discoveries were documented in a small, self-published book, The Mystery of Crosswind, copies of which are now bibliographic rarities. According to their research, a network of underground tunnels was discovered behind the ruins of the inn, connecting the building with the abandoned mines. In these tunnels, the researchers found the remains of strange structures and objects that may have been used in rituals. One of the most shocking artifacts found by the expedition was described as a silver mask with engraved symbols resembling those described in Martinez's report. The mask was sent to a university laboratory for analysis, but mysteriously disappeared en route, and the only photograph of it turned out to be too blurry to identify the symbols. Local residents told the expedition legends about the inn that had been passed down from generation to generation. According to these stories, even after the fire and the rangers' investigation, strange things continued to happen in the city. People saw female figures wandering around the ruins at night, heard strange sounds coming from the abandoned mines, and noticed unexplained lights flickering in the darkness. Especially disturbing was the story told by Ebenezer Clark, a 90-year-old longtime resident whose father was one of the miners working in Crosswind in the 1870s. According to Clark, his father always claimed that the fire at the inn was not accidental. Dad said that evening, several people from the town, including him, decided to put an end to what was happening at the inn, Clark said. They knew that the rangers were approaching and were afraid that the sisters would manage to destroy the evidence or, even worse, escape. They set fire to the building from several sides at the same time, making sure that no one could get out. But the most disturbing thing in Clark's story was that, according to his father, the day after the fire, one of the arsonists found 2 silver medallions with names engraved on them at his house. They were the names of 2 of his children, Clark said, and a week later, both children died of a strange disease in which blood literally came out through the pores of the skin. And he was not the only one who lost loved ones after that night. According to Clark, An unusually large number of people died in Crosswind and its surroundings during the year after the fire at the inn, almost a third of the population. Most of the deaths were attributed to an epidemic of an unknown disease, but the local residents were sure that it was a curse of the Caulfield sisters. The 1967 expedition also discovered some strange records in the archives of neighboring cities. One of the reports of a local doctor, dated November of 1875, a month after the fire at the inn, described cases of unexplained anemia in children and young women. "Patients lose blood for no apparent reason," wrote Dr. Harold Fisher. "There are no external wounds or internal bleeding that can be detected during examination, but the blood level is steadily decreasing, ultimately leading to death. Even more disturbing is that many patients report nightmares in which two women in black dresses approach them and touch their necks with their cold fingers." This epidemic lasted for about 6 months and then, just as inexplicably, ceased as it had begun. By that time, Crosswind had lost almost half of its population, and many of the remaining residents chose to leave the town, considering it cursed. The story of the Caulfield sisters might have remained a forgotten episode in the history of the Wild West, were it not for a series of events that occurred at the end of the 20th century, which led researchers to revisit it. In 1994, during the reconstruction of an old building in Denver, Colorado, workers discovered a walled-up room containing numerous artifacts from the late 19th century. Among them was a collection of photographs, documents, and strange objects presumably related to the activities of some secret society. Of particular interest was a group photograph dated 1893, depicting 12 people, 6 men and 6 women, dressed in evening attire and standing around a table with silver goblets. On the back of the photograph was the inscription "Brotherhood of the Silver Chalice, Annual Denver Gathering." Among the women in the photograph, 2 strikingly resembled the description of the Caulfield sisters, although by that time they should have been significantly older than the women appeared in the snapshot. Even more disturbing was the content of a diary found there, presumably belonging to one of the members of this brotherhood. It detailed rituals practically identical to those conducted at the Caulfield Sisters Asylum, including the use of human blood to prolong life and gain certain abilities. The author of the diary, signing with the initials AL, wrote about the Great Sisters, 2 women who led the brotherhood and possessed the wisdom of ages. He mentioned that they had survived a great fire and were forced to start over, but their knowledge and power remained unchanged. The diary also contained mentions of the Brotherhood's plans to spread their practices throughout America through a network of specialized establishments disguised as ordinary brothels, saloons, or even private clubs. The author wrote, "The modern world provides us with new opportunities. People disappear in big cities as easily as they do on the frontier, or perhaps even more easily. Railroads and steamboats allow us to move quickly and avoid suspicion. And most importantly, the world is becoming more skeptical of the supernatural, which makes our work even safer." The find in Denver attracted the attention of both authorities and independent researchers. The FBI conducted an investigation but officially stated that the materials found were most likely a hoax or artifacts of some harmless secret society popular in the late 19th century. The diary and other items were placed in an archive, where they remained inaccessible to the public until the early 2000s. However, in 2003, paranormal researcher David Reynolds gained access to these materials as part of his work on a book about secret societies in America. What he discovered forced him to reconsider the official version and begin his own investigation. Reynolds drew attention to a series of articles in Denver newspapers from the period between 1893 and 1895 describing the disappearance of young men and women. Many of the missing were last seen entering a building on Larimer Street, where, according to city records, a private club called the Silver Circle was located. Even more intriguing was that, while studying contemporary cases of missing people, Reynolds discovered certain patterns reminiscent of those associated with the activities of the Caulfield sisters and the Brotherhood of the Silver Chalice. In several cities across the United States, series of disappearances periodically occurred, often linked to nightclubs, exclusive spas, or private medical clinics. In his book Immortals Among Us, published in 2005, Reynolds put forward the theory that a cult that began its activities in the Wild West might exist to this day, adapting to changing conditions and using modern methods to conceal its true nature. If we assume that their methods really allowed them to significantly prolong life, Reynolds wrote, then we cannot rule out that some of the original members of the Brotherhood, including the Caulfield sisters themselves, may still be alive, managing the organization and planning their actions for decades to come. Reynolds's book was met with skepticism by most critics, but attracted the attention of certain circles interested in paranormal phenomena and conspiracy theories. It also inspired several independent researchers to search for evidence of the existence of modern heirs to the Brotherhood. One such researcher, journalist Michael Jennings, began an investigation in 2008 into an unusual spa called Eternal Youth that had opened in Las Vegas. The salon offered exclusive rejuvenation treatments available only by referral and costing tens of thousands of dollars. Rumor had it that celebrities, politicians, and businesspeople were among the salon's clients, many of whom demonstrated extraordinary rejuvenation results. Working undercover, Jennings managed to get a job at Eternal Youth as a service worker. What he discovered there was so disturbing that he decided to contact the FBI before publishing his article. According to his notes found in his apartment after his disappearance, there were rooms resembling medical laboratories in the basement of the salon, where strange procedures were performed using human blood. They call it plasma lifting, Jennings wrote, but what I saw goes far beyond any known medical procedures. They collect blood from young people who come here supposedly to donate blood for money, and then somehow process it and inject it into their VIP clients. But there is another part of the salon that only a select few have access to. Strange sounds like chanting or prayers sometimes come from there. Jennings also noted that the owners of the salon were two women who introduced themselves as Dr. Elizabeth Carey and Dr. Maria Carey. They claimed to be sisters and had developed a unique rejuvenation technique based on ancient knowledge adapted for modern science. The journalist noticed the strange similarity of their names to the Caulfield sisters and that, despite their stated age of 50-something, both women looked no older than 30. Even more suspicious was that, despite the supposed scientific basis of their methods, neither of the doctors Carey had published scientific articles, and information about their medical education was absent from official registries. Michael Jennings disappeared the day before his scheduled meeting with FBI agents. His apartment was found in perfect order, without signs of a struggle or hasty departure, but the journalist himself seemed to have vanished into thin air. The only strangeness noted by the police was a silver medallion with the engraved letter be found on the doorstep of his apartment. The FBI conducted an investigation at Eternal Youth, but by that time the salon had been closed, and all equipment and documents had been removed. The owners had also disappeared, leaving only perfectly executed documents for closing the business and paying all taxes and compensation to employees. The disappearance of Jennings and the mysterious closure of Eternal Youth might have remained just another unsolved mystery were it not for strange events that occurred in subsequent years. Over the next 3 years, no fewer than 5 similar establishments opened and then just as suddenly closed in various cities across the United States, all offering exclusive rejuvenation services, all managed by women whose names and appearances varied, but certain traits remained unchanged. In 2012, independent documentarian Sarah Chun began work on a film about a blood cult in the Wild West, planning to connect the story of the Caulfield sisters with modern practices and theories about life extension. In the process, she discovered evidence of what might be the ongoing activity of the Brotherhood or a similar organization. While interviewing a former employee of one of the suspicious spas in Miami, Chun learned about the existence of an entire network of such establishments, connected by a system of secret symbols and signs. Clients of a special category learned about us through encrypted advertisements in certain magazines or on special forums on the internet. Her source, who wished to remain anonymous, said, "These people paid huge sums of money for procedures that we, ordinary employees, were not told about. They were taken to a separate wing of the building, which we did not have access to." Particularly disturbing was the description of a symbol that, according to the source, was used to identify special clients. A silver chalice with a drop resembling a drop of blood. This symbol was strikingly reminiscent of those described in the documents about the Brotherhood of the Silver Chalice and in reports of the activities of the Caulfield sisters. Sarah Chun also discovered a connection between some of these modern establishments and the disappearances of people, predominantly young, healthy men and women without strong family ties. Although there was no direct evidence, Statistical analysis showed an unusually high percentage of disappearances in areas where suspicious spas and clinics opened and operated. In the process of working on the documentary, Chun established contact with a group of researchers who had been tracking what they called a blood cult for many years. In their opinion, this organization had existed for centuries, changing its forms and methods of operation, but maintaining the basic practice of using human blood in rituals aimed at prolonging life and gaining certain abilities. They adapt to every era, one of the researchers said in an interview with Chun. In the Middle Ages, they hid behind the mask of aristocracy or church orders. In the 19th century, they used the chaos and lawlessness of the frontier. In the 20th, they mimicked scientific and medical institutions. Now they hide behind the facade of elite wellness centers and aesthetic medicine clinics, but the essence remains the same. They hunt people, use their blood, and disappear when suspicions arise. Researchers suggested that the modern blood cult might be much more organized and influential than its historical predecessors. In their opinion, it included wealthy and influential people willing to pay any money and commit any crimes to prolong their lives and youth. Particularly alarming was the theory that some of the cult's leaders might be the same people who had been running it centuries ago, if their methods really allowed them to significantly slow down aging or even achieve a kind of immortality. Researchers pointed to strange coincidences in the descriptions of key figures in the cult in different eras. The same manners, habits, even specific phrases, passed down from generation to generation with astonishing accuracy. Sarah Chen's documentary, Eternal Thirst, From the Wild West to the Present Day, was shown at several independent film festivals in 2013 and received mixed reviews. Critics praised the technical execution, but many considered the topic too fantastic and conspiratorial. The film never received wide distribution and soon disappeared from public access. Sarah Chun herself ceased public activity after the film's release. According to her friends, she received threats and even noticed surveillance. In 2014, she went on a trip to Europe and has since maintained contact only with her immediate family, refusing to give interviews or comment on her work. But the story of the Caulfield sisters and their possible modern heirs did not end there. In 2018, an anonymous informant provided journalists with a set of documents allegedly obtained as a result of hacking the servers of an organization calling itself the Institute for Advanced Biomedical Research, or IABR for short. The documents contained information about research conducted by IABR in the field of rejuvenation using the blood of young donors, as well as internal protocols and correspondence indicating that behind the scientific facade were practices suspiciously reminiscent of the rituals described in historical documents about the Caulfield sisters and the Brotherhood of the Silver Chalice. Particularly disturbing was a letter from 1EK-MK, in which plans were discussed to expand the activities of the IABR and the need to ensure a constant flow of material for the ceremonies of the Great Renewal. The letter also mentioned the unsuccessful experience in Crosswind and the need to prevent a recurrence of those mistakes. The leak caused brief media interest, but IABR soon issued an official statement, calling the documents a fake created by competitors or opponents of scientific progress. The Institute invited journalists to visit its laboratories and verify the legality and ethics of the research being conducted. The journalists' visit to the IABR's headquarters in Chicago was widely covered in the press. They were shown modern laboratories where research was being conducted in the field of regenerative medicine, including legal and ethically approved experiments using donor plasma to treat various diseases. The director of the institute, Dr. Eleanor Carson, an elegant woman of indefinite age, personally conducted the tour and answered all questions. She categorically denied any connection with secret societies or illegal practices, explaining the document leak as an attempt to discredit a promising scientific direction. Most of the journalists were satisfied with the explanations, and the scandal quickly subsided. However, some observers noted a strange coincidence between the director's initials and the initials from the intercepted correspondence, as well as the unusual similarity of her appearance to the description of Elizabeth Caulfield preserved in historical documents. Even more suspicious was that shortly after the journalist's visit, IABR announced a reorganization and relocation to a new location, and then virtually disappeared from the public sphere. The official institute continued to exist, publishing scientific articles and reports from time to time, but it became impossible to physically find its offices or laboratories. The story of the Caulfield sisters and their alleged modern heirs remains one of the most disturbing and unresolved mysteries in American history. Separating truth from fiction, real events from legends in this story is practically impossible, especially given that many key documents have been lost, destroyed, or classified. What we know for sure is that in 1885, a brothel managed by two women calling themselves the Caulfield sisters did exist in the Texas town of Crosswind. Disappearances of people did occur at this establishment. The building did burn down under suspicious circumstances, and the bodies of the owners were never found. Everything else, strange rituals, the use of human blood, the connection with secret societies, and especially the continuation of these practices in the modern era, remains in the realm of speculation and conspiracy theory. However, for those who are willing to look deeper, there are disturbing signs that the story of the Caulfield sisters did not end in the 19th century. Disappearances of people who were last seen entering certain establishments continue to this day. Elite spas and clinics offering revolutionary rejuvenation methods open and suddenly close for no apparent reason. And in the dark corners of the internet, there are forums where people discuss places and ways to obtain real rejuvenation, the kind that official medicine and cosmetology cannot offer. In 2020, Seattle police discovered an underground clinic in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, they found modern medical equipment, supplies of pharmaceuticals, and, most alarmingly, cells resembling prison cells with beds equipped for intravenous infusions. Analysis of blood traces found on the premises showed that they belonged to at least 17 different people, and all samples were fresh. The clinic's operators disappeared before the police arrived, leaving a minimum of personal belongings and documents. The only clue was a small silver medallion with an engraved chalice found in one of the offices. Experts noted a striking resemblance between this symbol and those described in historical documents about the Brotherhood of the Silver Chalice and the Caulfield sisters. The investigation into this case is still ongoing, but it is already clear that some procedures were performed in the underground clinic using human blood, not voluntarily donated but forcibly extracted from people held against their will. Even more alarming is that similar underground establishments have been discovered in recent years in Miami, Los Angeles, and even Tokyo, indicating the international nature of this organization. In all cases, the operators disappeared before the authorities arrived, and the investigation stalled due to the lack of reliable evidence and witnesses. Some researchers suggest that in the modern era, the blood cult has split into two parts. The first is a legal facade in the form of elite medical and cosmetology centers serving wealthy and influential clients, where relatively safe, albeit ethically questionable, procedures are practiced using donor blood and plasma. The second part is a deeply concealed network of underground establishments where ancient rituals continue to be performed using forcibly obtained blood. It is this part of the organization that is associated with the disappearances of people and other crimes. Attempts by journalists and independent researchers to penetrate this organization often end in failure or even tragedy. Over the past 10 years, no fewer than 5 journalists working on materials about modern blood cults have disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. The last of them was Jason Moore, a freelance reporter specializing in investigations in the field of alternative medicine and paramedicine. In 2021, he began working on an article about vampire procedures, cosmetic techniques using the patient's own blood that are popular among celebrities. Maybe the secret to their eternal youth lies not only in plastic surgery and a healthy lifestyle, but also in something much more ancient and sinister. The story of the Caulfield sisters and their heirs reminds us of the dark side of the human desire for immortality and of what some are willing to do to prolong their lives. It also makes us wonder, what if there really are people among us who have found a way to cheat death, albeit at such a terrible price? And if you ever see an advertisement for an exclusive spa or clinic offering revolutionary rejuvenation methods and notice a silver chalice among the decor, perhaps you should think about what might be hiding behind that facade. And are the Caulfield sisters really dead? Or does their story continue to this day, only changing the scenery over time? We may never know the truth, but one thing is certain. Something terrible happened in a quiet Texas town in 1885, the echo of which resonates through the centuries, reminding us that the scariest monsters are not those that hide in the dark, but those that wear a human face and smile at us, offering to fulfill our deepest desires. If you ever find yourself in West Texas and decide to visit the place where Crosswind once stood, be careful. Locals say that on a full moon, on the ruins of the Caulfield Sisters Asylum, you can see two female figures in black dresses standing motionless and looking at the road, as if waiting for new visitors. And if you meet their gaze, gray, cold eyes, like the eyes of a porcelain doll, they may invite you in and offer you their special hospitality. But remember, for every promise of immortality, there is always a price to pay, and that price is not only your own blood, but also your humanity. And no eternal life is worth turning into a monster like the Caulfield Sisters, existing for centuries and feeding on the suffering of others. And yet, isn't it tempting sometimes to think about the possibility of living not one short human life but several, seeing how the world changes, how civilizations come and go, how humanity reaches new heights? Maybe it is this alluring thought that attracts new followers to the blood cult in every generation, despite the terrible price that must be paid. Or maybe somewhere in a luxurious penthouse in New York or in a secluded villa in the Swiss Alps, two women resembling sisters sit in chairs with glasses of ruby-red liquid and laugh at how easily people forget the lessons of the past, how they fall for the same tricks again and again, drawn by the promise of eternal youth and beauty. And in the light of the setting sun, their eyes flash with an inhuman gleam for a moment, and on their pale wrists, you can see ancient silver bracelets with the symbol of the chalice, the very one that was depicted on the medallion in the Caulfield Sisters Asylum in distant 1785. Perhaps history really never ends. It only subsides for a while, only to return in a new guise but with the same dark essence. And who knows, maybe next time its main characters will be you and me, drawn by the promise of something that seems impossible but is so desperately desired. After all, don't we all, deep down, want to live forever?